Hey there, welcome to Karen Strikes Again, where peaceful neighborhoods meet unhinged drama. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor who thinks your property is hers, you're going to feel right at home here. Let me ask you something. Have you ever moved into what you thought was your dream neighborhood, only to realize you were living next door to a nightmare? Imagine this. You wake up one morning, pour your coffee, step outside to check on your backyard, only to find a group of strangers digging holes, measuring spaces, and hauling wood in your yard, not the park, not the sidewalk, your private backyard. You rush over, confused, thinking maybe it's a mistake, a utility issue, a city project. Nope. It's a community garden initiative, apparently approved by someone in the HOA. But here's the kicker. You never agreed to it. No one asked you, no one notified you, and standing in the background, sipping a green smoothie like she owns the block, is Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. This is the story of how she tried to take what wasn't hers, and how she learned that not everyone rolls over when faced with a clipboard and fake rules. But this time, Karen picked the wrong neighbor. Stay with me, because things are about to get wild. Let me rewind a little so you get the full picture. About a year ago, my wife and I moved into what we thought was a quiet, upscale suburban neighborhood just outside of Portland. The kind of place with well-trimmed hedges, friendly waves, and an optional HOA, the kind that mostly just sent out newsletters and reminded you to pay your dues on time. At least that's what the website said. We'd been living there for maybe 3 months when I first heard the name Karen. It started innocently enough. One of the neighbors, I think her name was Debbie, stopped me while I was out front trimming the bushes and said, "Hey, just a heads up, try not to leave your trash bins out overnight. Karen tends to get testy." I laughed. "Karen from the board?" Debbie smiled tightly. "Oh, you'll know who she is soon enough." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Every neighborhood has one, right? That person who takes the rules a little too seriously. Then came the little notes. First, it was a Post-it stuck to our mailbox reminding us that our grass was 0.75 inches too long, according to HOA guidelines. I checked. There was no such guideline. Next, it was an email from the HOA account, no name attached, asking us to consider a more neutral tone for our door wreath. Ours had sunflowers on it. We ignored it. Until one day we got a knock at the door. There she was. Mid-50s, platinum blonde bob with razor-sharp edges, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand. The real-life embodiment of every internet Karen meme you've ever seen. "I'm Karen," she said flatly. "From the HOA, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm kind of the unofficial eyes and ears of the community." I smiled politely. "Oh, great to meet you." She didn't smile back. "You should know that some residents have expressed concern about your backyard." I blinked. "My backyard?" She nodded. "Yes, it's quite large, a bit underutilized. There's been talk at the board about converting part of it into something more community-focused, a garden space maybe, for everyone." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. "That won't be happening," I said, still trying to be polite. Her lips tightened. "Well, that's not up to you entirely. As a member of this community, you have certain obligations." "I have a deed," I interrupted, "and a fence. That's private property." She tilted her head. "We'll see." And with that, she walked away. I told my wife about it later that evening. We laughed it off, made some wine, and joked about starting a beehive in the yard to scare people off. We thought it was over, but we were wrong. Because a few weeks later, without warning, without consent, and without so much as a courtesy heads up, Karen would make her move and, let's just say, It wasn't with flowers and vegetables, it was with contractors, wood, shovels, and a plan that didn't involve me. The owner of the land. Next thing I knew, the backyard wasn't mine anymore, at least not according to her. It started like any other Monday. I had just wrapped up a night shift at the hospital, exhausted, running on caffeine and stubbornness. All I wanted was to collapse onto my couch and sleep for 10 hours straight. But when I turned the corner onto my street, my stomach dropped. There were people in my backyard, not birds, not squirrels, people, strangers. At least 3 of them wearing work gloves, hauling wooden posts and digging holes. One guy had a tape measure stretched across my lawn, another was carrying a wheelbarrow filled with what looked like compost, and they weren't even trying to be subtle about it. I slammed the brakes, jumped out of my truck, and stormed around the side gate, only to find that the lock had been cut, clean through. "Excuse me," I barked. "What the hell are you doing in my yard?" They looked up casually like I was the one interrupting them. One of the guys shrugged. "Just setting up the plot lines for the garden," I blinked. "What garden?" That's when I heard her voice. "Oh, good! You're home!" I turned to see Karen, standing on the sidewalk in her yoga pants and tennis visor, holding a clipboard and an iced latte like she was directing a film shoot. "This is private property," I snapped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Relax. It's all been approved. The HOA voted. The back of your property technically backs onto the Greenbelt easement. That gives us some leeway." "No." "It doesn't," I barked. "There's a fence. There's a deed. You do not have permission to be here." Karen sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Look, we already started. It would just be easier if you went along with it. The community really needs a shared space." I stared at her, speechless. "You broke into my yard, cut my lock, hired workers. And you think I'm just going to say okay?" She smiled, that smile. The smug, passive-aggressive, "I dare you to fight me" smile. Wouldn't it be nice to be remembered as someone who contributed to something bigger than themselves? I didn't respond. I just turned around, pulled out my phone, and started recording everything. I got footage of the broken lock, the workers digging, the materials stacked in my yard, and I made sure to get Karen in frame too, smirking like the villain in a low-budget soap opera. Then I called the police. Karen's smile faded the moment I mentioned the word trespassing. "You don't need to get the authorities involved," she snapped. "Too late," I said. "You're done here." The cops arrived about 20 minutes later. By then, Karen had shooed the workers off-site, but the damage was already done. I showed the officers the footage, the lock, the materials. They were professional, but I could tell they were amused. One of them raised an eyebrow and said, "She just decided to start a project on your land?" "Yep." "And she doesn't own it?" "Nope." The officer turned to Karen, who suddenly found something fascinating on the sidewalk. "Ma'am, this is trespassing, and vandalism if anything was damaged," Karen scoffed. "It's not like we hurt anything. We were trying to help the community." "That doesn't give you the right to enter someone's property," the officer said evenly. "You're lucky he's not pressing charges." Karen turned to me, arms crossed. "So what? You're just going to be that guy? The selfish one?" I smiled. "Better that guy than the one getting arrested." She stormed off in a huff, muttering about how small-minded people ruin everything. As the officers left, one of them patted me on the shoulder and said, "Document everything, trust me." And I did, because even though Karen had been forced to retreat for now, I knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done yet, not even close. I thought calling the cops would be the end of it. I thought maybe, just maybe, being told by uniformed officers that she had no legal right to touch my property would be enough to make Karen back off. But clearly, I didn't understand the full power of suburban entitlement. The next morning, I found a letter stuffed into my mailbox, not mailed, just folded neatly and slid inside. No envelope, no signature, but I knew exactly where it came from the moment I saw the handwriting, blocky. All caps, passive-aggressively neat. It read, "As a member of this community, you have a responsibility to the greater good. Your refusal to support a communal green initiative speaks volumes about your priorities. The board has been notified." That was it. No name, no greeting. Just vague guilt-tripping and a veiled threat. I chuckled, snapped a picture of the note, and saved it to my growing Karen evidence folder. At this point, I felt like I was building a case file. A few days passed without incident. No workers. In my yard, no more surprise construction. I started to relax a bit. Then came the email. It was from the HOA board, addressed to all residents of Oak Ridge Estates. Due to recent events, a special meeting will be held this Friday at 6 p.m. to discuss potential uses of common land and resolve neighborhood disputes. I knew exactly what this was. Karen was trying to spin this into a community issue. Frame me as the selfish, non-cooperative neighbor and herself as some kind of civic-minded hero. Fine, let's play. I spent the next few evenings printing out photos, screenshots, and copies of property records. I came prepared. If she wanted to play politics, I'd bring receipts. Friday arrived. I walked into the HOA clubhouse with a folder under my arm and my wife at my side. About 20 residents were already there, murmuring in small clusters. Karen was front and center, wearing a pearl necklace and a blazer like she was running for city council. When she saw me, she smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predator's smile. She was ready for a fight. The HOA president, a tired-looking man named Carl, who clearly regretted volunteering, called the meeting to order. Karen immediately raised her hand. "I'd like to open with a proposal," she said sweetly. "To designate the rear sections of underutilized properties that back onto the greenbelt as shared community garden space." A few people nodded. A few others looked confused. Karen continued, "Certain homeowners, through no fault of their own, have yards that sit adjacent to community-accessible land. We believe that allocating that space for a shared garden would benefit everyone." I raised my hand. "Question for the board. Has anyone actually volunteered their property for this?" Karen answered before anyone else could. "Well, it's not about volunteering. It's about rethinking how we use shared resources." "It's not a shared resource," I said flatly. "It's on my deed. I have the survey documents here." I handed copies to Carl and a few nearby residents. Karen's smile flickered. Carl reviewed them, sighing. "Yes, this property is clearly privately owned. It's not HOA-managed land." I turned to the crowd. "Also, I'd like to note that someone, Karen, cut the lock on my gate and hired workers to dig up my lawn without permission. I have photos, I have footage, I called the police. I didn't press charges yet, but I will if it happens again." Karen's jaw clenched. "I was acting in the neighborhood's best interest." Carl looked at her, weary. "Karen, that's not how any of this works." Someone in the back whispered, "She's lost it." Another voice, "She tried that with the Johnsons last year too." Karen's head whipped around. "Excuse me," Carl held up a hand. "Enough! This meeting is adjourned. No garden will be forced onto anyone's property." People started to leave. Karen stood alone, red-faced, her plan in ruins. But she didn't glare at Carl or the neighbors. She glared at me, and in that moment I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. For a few blissful days after the HOA meeting, things went quiet. No more letters. No more weird notes in the mailbox. No strange contractors creeping around my fence line. It was almost peaceful, almost. Then came the Facebook posts. My wife was the first to see them. She was part of a local neighborhood group, mostly people selling old furniture or warning others about coyotes, but that morning she handed me her phone with a grim look. "Look at this," she said. It was a post, long, dramatic and painfully vague. No names were mentioned, but it was clearly about me. It's a shame when certain homeowners forget that they live in a community, not a fortress. Some people think fences give them the right to act selfishly and block progress. Sad, really. We should be working together, not hoarding space for ourselves. The comment section was a mix of support and confusion. A few people chimed in with "so true" or "thank you for speaking up." But others asked, "Wait, who are we talking
About, or is this about the garden thing?"
Karen didn't reply, but she liked every comment that took her side. Classic. I laughed it off at first, but then came the whispers. People at the coffee shop pausing when I walked in. A neighbor who used to wave, suddenly pretending not to see me. Karen was poisoning the well. And then, because of course she would, she filed a noise complaint. One afternoon, I was doing yard work. Nothing crazy, just mowing the lawn, trimming hedges, normal stuff. 2 days later, I got a letter from the HOA. A formal noise complaint has been filed regarding your use of power tools during restricted hours. Please be aware of community quiet time between 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. I checked my Ring camera footage. I had finished mowing at 6:45 p.m. She was reaching now, grasping at anything she could to make me look like the villain. Then came the worst part. One morning, I stepped out to grab the mail and found another note, but this one wasn't typed. It wasn't in a passive-aggressive font or folded politely. It was scrawled in red marker across a torn sheet of paper taped to my front door. "You don't belong here." No signature, just those 4 words. For the first time in this whole saga, I felt genuinely rattled. This wasn't HOA nonsense or Facebook.
Pettiness. This was personal. And I knew exactly who did it. I checked the cameras.
Of course, the door-facing cam had mysteriously cut out for a 2-minute window, probably tampered with or something interfered with the signal. I filed a police report. I showed them the note, the footage gaps, the pattern of harassment. They took it seriously this time. Meanwhile, I printed out the Facebook post, the HOA complaints, and the images of the note. I packaged everything up because Karen clearly wasn't done. But neither was I. I wasn't just defending my yard anymore. I was defending my home, my peace of mind, my right to not be bullied by a wannabe dictator in yoga pants. Karen had crossed the line, and I was ready to push back, hard. If Karen thought she could intimidate me into silence, she miscalculated. The moment I got that note, "You don't belong here," something shifted. This wasn't just a feud anymore. It was targeted harassment. And I'd had enough. I wasn't going to stoop to her level. No anonymous notes, no public smear campaigns. I was going to handle it the smart way, with facts, proof, and paperwork. I started by filing a formal harassment complaint through the HOA's legal channel. Most people don't even know their HOA has one, but they do. And it turns out when you attach a police report, photos of a threatening note, HOA complaints made in bad faith, and screenshots of passive-aggressive public posts, they take it seriously. Then I called an attorney, not to sue her yet, but to have an official cease and desist letter drafted. One that outlined every incident and warned of legal consequences if she continued. We hand-delivered it to her house the next day. Wish I could have seen her face when she opened it. But I didn't have to, because the very next morning I noticed something odd. Her Facebook post? Gone. The neighborhood whispers? Quiet. The HOA? Silent, even more surprising. Karen. No walking. Around with a clipboard. No pacing her lawn on the phone. No smug looks thrown in my direction. She vanished, figuratively, not literally, from community life. For about a week, I didn't see or hear a single thing from her. Then came the HOA newsletter. It was the usual mix of updates and announcements. Until I reached the bottom, we'd like to thank Karen Thompson for her time and service on the HOA board and wish her well as she steps down from her position. I blinked. Reread it. She stepped down, voluntarily or not, I didn't know, but it felt final. The same woman who had treated the HOA like her personal kingdom had walked away from her throne. And for the first time since we moved in, the neighborhood felt calm, peaceful, normal, but something in my gut told me it wasn't over. Because people like Karen don't just give up, they regroup, they plan. And judging by the way she avoided eye contact at the mailbox that week, I knew one thing for sure. Karen hadn't forgotten. She was just waiting. For the first time in months, everything was quiet. Karen kept to herself. No clipboard, no notes, no HOA drama. She even started watering her plants at normal hours instead of her usual 6 a.m. patrol routine. I'd see her sometimes, always, with her sunglasses on, always looking away the second our eyes met. The silence was almost unsettling. One morning, I found a bag of fresh oranges on my porch.
No note. No explanation. A few neighbors said they got the same thing. Maybe she's turning over a new leaf, one of them joked. But I didn't laugh, because I knew better. Karen didn't do random acts of kindness. Karen did strategy. I could
feel it. That calm before the storm energy. And then one evening, I noticed something strange. A car I didn't recognize parked near the corner of my property. Same spot. Every day, different times. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Until
I saw the window rolled down and a phone held up. Someone was filming, not openly, not obviously, but definitely filming, and somehow I already knew who was behind it. Karen wasn't done. She was regrouping, planning her next move. And this time, she was going to play dirty. You'd think after being called out publicly, legally, warned, and stepping down from the HOA board, Karen would just let it go. But no. That parked car, the silent phone recordings, the suspicious calm, they weren't coincidences. Karen was waiting for the right moment. And something told me
it was coming soon, so I started documenting everything again. Camera footage, license plate numbers, even random screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group. Because if there's one thing I've learned, Karen doesn't quit. She plots, she adapts, she strikes again, and next time. She won't just try to take my backyard, she'll try to ruin
my name. But she's not the only one who knows how to play this game. If you think this saga is over, think again.
Hit that subscribe button, because in the next episode, Karen goes too far and I fight back harder than ever. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor like this? Drop your story in the comments, and remember, sometimes the nicest neighborhoods have the nastiest drama.